Right, so before I even start talking about Avengers Endgame, I am issuing the world's biggest spoiler warning! If you have not seen Avengers Endgame, do not watch this video. Go and see Avengers Endgame, and then come on back, click on this video, and sit and watch it, because we are going to go so in depth as to what happened in what is now probably the world's biggest movie of all time. If you haven't already though, I have done a spoiler-free review of Avengers Endgame where I just give my general thoughts and feelings about the movie. I try and keep it as light as possible in terms of what happens story-wise. That's what this review is for, at least. But if you just want to know my general thoughts and ultimately what I gave the film, go check that out. I'll put a link in the description. Right, so if you have seen my previous review, you know that I gave Avengers Endgame a 10 out of 10. I have seen the film 3 times since. I am now looking to go for a 4th time and then hopefully another 5th time. I absolutely adore this film, not just because it's a fantastic superhero adventure. It is the culmination of 22 films, a 22 film arc that's completely unprecedented in the history of cinema, and I just think that it's a beautiful ending, at least to like chapter 1 of this cinematic universe that Kevin Feige is leading us through. And as I said in my review, a lot happens in Avengers Endgame. Obviously, it's a 3-hour film, but I mean, tonally, thematically, narratively, there is so much that draws to a conclusion and so much that leaves us with a few questions as to what Phase 4 could set up and what the next saga could possibly be about. Obviously, Endgame now has made an absolute killing at the box office. I think in its opening weekend, globally, it made $1.2 billion in a matter of like 3 or 4 days. So now everyone's asking the question, is it going to top Avatar as the highest grossing movie of all time? And I think it might. But anyway, let's get on with my spoiler review for Avengers Endgame. And the movie opens up with Hawkeye, Clint Barton. Him and his family are having a picnic out in a field, and he's teaching his young daughter archery, and he turns around and she has been dusted. She has fallen victim of Thanos' snap, and he turns back and sees his family, and they are all dusted too. And that is such an impactful start, because Hawkeye was obviously not present in Infinity War. They mention it that him and Scott took a deal with their families, so they have to still stay under house arrest. But to see Hawkeye basically break and lose everything, and we see that further on down the line where he becomes Ronin, and he just, because he's lost everything, he has nothing more to turn to. His humanity's basically been taken away, and it's just such a glum note to open up on. And that's what I was on about when I said it's really continuing the tone that Infinity War left off, this sense of desperation, and that they are really facing the odds against them. So those are my thoughts on the opening, and then we cut to the Marvel Studios logo. And I noticed this on my second time round, is if you look at all the superheroes, the ones that have vanished because of the Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos snapping his fingers, they're no longer in the opening. They've been digitally airbrushed out. So it's just the heroes that we only have left. Heroes like Doctor Strange and Black Panther, they're not in that opening role of the like a rundown of the superheroes, which I thought was just quite a clever technique, but I don't think anyone else has quite spotted it yet. After that, we see Tony and Nebula are stuck adrift in space on the Guardian ship. They've used it to get off Titan, but they are drastically running out of fuel cells. The ship is completely stranded in space, running out of oxygen, life support, food, drink. So Nebula, it's fine because I think most of her is cybernetic, so she doesn't really need the energy. Whereas Tony Stark, you see him, he's sending a message to Pepper, and he's looking all gaunt, he's looking all sort of disheveled and broken, and he sends the message to Pepper, and he lays out on the hull of the ship, and ultimately it looks like he's taking his final nap. That he's at this point he's given up, and Nebula takes him and puts him in the captain's chair with the jacket on, which I thought was a really nice touch. This film has done a really good job at humanizing Nebula and taking her away from that villain stereotype that we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one. And if you look at her arc from then until now, She has had, in my opinion, one of the most transformative. However, as Tony is drifting off, we see a bright light flicker around his face, and we know that that is Captain Marvel. She notices him and she carries the ship back to the Avengers facility where Steve, Natasha, Bruce, and Pepper are there to meet him. And that embrace between Pepper and Tony is really, really heartfelt, especially because Tony mentions that he has no idea if Pepper has succumb to the snap and whether she is still on the planet. And also, Steve and Tony have a little heart to heart. Tony, sorry, says that he lost the kid, which is a reference to Spider-Man going away, and it's that dynamic where even though the last time they kind of saw each other, they were butting heads in Civil War, they've been able to overlook that and given this universal threat have put their differences aside, and that's the best thing that I can say about all of these films is that the screenwriters, particularly Marcus and McFeely, they know the characters so well. They know the characters inside out. The actors do too, but the interactions, the conversations, they feels as if these characters have been on one heck of a journey. They all meet up inside the Avengers compound and they're discussing what they're going to do about Thanos. It's been about 3 weeks since Thanos snapped his fingers and they're trying to locate him. Stark is completely suffering from PTSD. He gets scared. He argues with Cap a little, saying that he wasn't there for him. And it's Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in this film. And I know this goes without saying because he's never turned in a bad performance as Tony Stark. But this in Endgame is arguably some of his best work career wise. I know that a lot of people have been online saying that he should get he's well within his right to get nominated for an Oscar with this, similar to how people were clamoring for Hugh Jackman to get nominated for Logan. And yes, they are two very different performances, but in the way that they are suffering and they are scared and they are literally at their last edge, I think it's a possibility. I would love to see him get nominated for this. Ultimately, though, Stark passes out, and Nebula remembers that Thanos mentioned the garden, somewhere where he could go once his plan was completed. They pull that up on a 3D map and locate that Thanos used the stones there a few days ago. So they put together a team. Captain Marvel seems to want to go off on her own, and Thor stands in her way. And remember, I haven't seen the trailers, so that moment where Marvel is standing in front of him as Thor grabs Stormbreaker and she just looks him dead in the eye and gives a little smile, and Thor goes,
I like this one.
that was such a cool moment between two of arguably the most powerful characters in the MCU today. Then we get that amazing line from Steve, who you can just tell is angry at this point. He looks at the map and he says, let's go get this son of a bitch. The Avengers theme kicks in, Avengers Endgame, every single time. And we're British. Remember, you've got to remember, I'm seeing this in a British crowd. We don't clap at the end of films. We don't cheer during films. We are reserved when we watch them. We might give little laughs when necessary, but never have I been to see a film where people have gotten out of their seats at points cheering and whooping, except for Avengers Endgame. There are so many moments that I've seen with like packed out crowds and sold out theatres where people are clapping, they're cheering. One guy stood up and was like yelling his heart out as like I think it was his girlfriend or something, trying to pull him down as if an embarrassment. I don't care. I'm so happy that I got to see it in a crowd that were just thriving off the energy. So the momentum continues and our Avengers are traveling off into space and we get that amazing shot through Steve's eyes of space just traveling through him almost. It's such a beautiful shot. That's one of the, when I said in my review that I'd want certain stills framed and hung on my wall, that is one of them. I'll mention a couple of them later, but that specifically is one. They bust into Thanos' place and this dude is wrecked. He's scarred. He's kind of disfigured on one half of his body where he's used the stones initially and he's used the stones again. Thor comes in, chops off Thanos' hand, and Rocket turns the gauntlet over and we get revealed that there are no stones in there. Thanos ultimately then says that he's used the stones to destroy the stones. That way no one can go back on his plan and he can live in a balanced world. But Thor comes in, has clearly had enough with all of the talking because he feels like he failed the first time. lobs Thanos' head off, and walks off into the distance. The screen fades to black, and that is the end of Avengers Endgame. So I want to know, what did you think? What was your favourite moment of Avengers Endgame? Let me know in the comments below. If you have enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and blog are in the description below. Many thanks for watching, guys, and I shall see you in the next video. But of course, that's not the end of the film. A black screen comes on and the words fade in of 5 years later, which I thought was such a clever idea to pick up with these characters, because the world is still apart. It's still not whole. People are still suffering. Cities are completely desolate in places. I think one of the directors, I think it's Joe Russo, has a cameo as one of the members of the PTSD group. And it's nice to see Cap as well, because in Winter Soldier, Sam was the one running PTSD group, so it's nice to see that Cap has taken that upon himself. And obviously, as we get to the end of the film, you can kind of tell that the roles have switched. I'll get onto that a little bit later, but if you've seen the film, you know what I mean. We go back to the Avengers headquarters, and we see that Natasha is in charge, and she's sort of meeting up with Rocket and Nebula, Okoye, Rhodey and Danvers, who has now had a new haircut, and she looks a heck of a lot more like her comic book depiction. Not that there was anything wrong with her Captain Marvel look, but this one looks as if she has literally stepped out the pages of the comic book. Okoye says something interesting here, because each of them are talking about events that they're handling in various parts of the galaxy, and Okoye brings up the fact that there was an earthquake under the ocean. Now, that could just be anything. It could just be a throwaway disaster that Wakanda are not gonna help in that situation. It's a natural disaster, they've just got to let it happen. However, myself and I know a lot of other people are speculating, and this is pure speculation, we've got nothing to base this on, but a lot of people think that that may be a tie-in to Namor, the Submariner, another comic book character that since Disney have got the acquisition to Fox characters now, a lot of people think that there may be a way that they can implement him in. I personally, I think it might be a tie-in that they can just say was there, but ultimately I don't think that was the intention. I think it was just a natural disaster that Wakanda are just going to let be. I completely forgot to mention, we cut to San Francisco, and Scott Lang jumps back out of the van. He's been only in the quantum realm for about 5 hours, even though the rest of the world have lived out for 5 years. He goes to this like mass memorial grave where he notices that his name is on one of them, of the people that vanished, and he runs off to his daughter's house where Cassie is staying. Obviously 5 years has passed, so she's grown up, and it's a really tender embrace between the two. And I know Paul Rudd gets a lot of praise for his comedic acting, and rightly so, but it's some of these smaller interactions that he's holding back the tears, and he is emotionally distraught that he hasn't been there for his daughter. That scene where he holds her in his arms is truly heartbreaking. Going back to the Avengers facility, Nat is joined by Steve, and they're having a conversation about how they've been unable to move on, and ultimately Ant-Man shows up, and then he's mentioning ideas about time travel because he was in the quantum realm for 5 hours. He's saying that if we can harness time travel and we can enter the quantum realm at one point in time and leave at another point in time, that they can get the stones before Thanos, and that ultimately becomes our story. That's what I wasn't able to say in my review. We get time travel. Great Scott! They say that they need someone who can help work out the logistics of time travel, and we cut to Tony Stark, who has now got a lakeside house, and he's going out into the garden, and we also discover that he now has a daughter called Morgan, which I thought was a really nice reference to back in Infinity War, when Tony's saying that he dreamt of a kid.
We named him after your eccentric uncle. What was his name?
Right.
Morgan.
Cap, Natasha, and Scott all turn up, and they're trying to convince Tony that they need him on their team to try and fix everything. But Tony's scared not just of Thanos, but he's worried that if they go back in time and change the past, then he's worried that he's not going to have his future still remaining, that he won't able to have his family. However, though, in pretty much an evening, Tony cracks time travel, which I know is a bit of a convenience, but it's kind of needed, and considering this is a 3-hour movie and a lot happens already, I'm kind of fine with the fact that he is able to get it so quickly, especially if you think that maybe he's been planning this up all along, and he's just been scared to even implement it. We go back to the Avengers facility, and there's a great scene just before that where they meet up with Bruce Banner, who now over these past 5 years has combined the mind of Bruce Banner and the strength of the Hulk, and ultimately we now have Professor Hulk, who's getting pictures with kids in diners, dabbing as well. It's cringy, but in a good way. He basically just comes across as this very embarrassing dad figure, which, considering it's the Hulk, is a great subversion of expectations. And the best part is that they do keep this going. Hulk never rages out at any moment. He is Banner, just looking like the Hulk. They're testing out time travel, which gives us a really quite funny sequence of Scott going into the quantum realm and coming back as a younger version of himself and as a much older version of himself. Tony then turns up and says that he's cracked it. Nebula and Rocket arrive, they're assembling a team, and Hulk goes off with Rocket to find Thor, who, if you thought Hulk had a bit of a change over these 5 years, Thor's change is even bigger. Literally. They go to New Asgard, which there is just something so ridiculously hilarious about seeing the Hulk kind of crammed into the back of a pickup truck and just smiling so leisurely. But they go to New Asgard, which is a fishing town, and we see Valkyrie. She's there and she's like, Thor isn't really up for seeing anyone. The only thing he's really relying on is giant kegs of beer. Rocket and Hulk go into his house, and it is an absolute pigsty. Thor comes in, and I thought this just before Tony said it later in the film, but I was like, oh my god, he's turned into the dude from The Big Lebowski. He's got a giant beard, hair down to his shoulders, a giant gut as well. Korg and Mika there as well, which again, you just can't help but love Taika Waititi as Korg. Banner and Rocket eventually convince Thor to join the team, and this is it now. They discover that if they can go back in time and grab the Infinity Stones, then they can stop Thanos from wiping out everyone in it altogether. And they eventually discover that they can split off into, I think it's 3 or 4 teams. They realize that there were 3 stones in New York at one particular point in time. They have to go and grab the Reality Stone from Asgard at one particular time, and also need to grab the Power Stone from Morag and the Soul Stone from Vormir. So they split off into their groups. We get that great shot of them walking and getting ready for this ginormous adventure with the Avengers music blaring in. Again, Alan Silvestri's score in this film is perfect. Not just the theme, but the way it is able to elevate moments that are already visually epic and just create this ultimate spectacle of visuals and sound that make it, like I said, one of the most epic superhero films we're ever gonna see. They split into their groups. You've got Captain America, Iron Man, Ant-Man, and the Hulk going off to New York in 2012, which coincides with the Battle of New York from the Avengers. Hulk is talking to the Ancient One. Tilda Swinton's back in the film, trying to get the Time Stone, and it's good to see that she did have some sort of a part facing the Chitauri, because she's protecting the Sanctum Sanctorum. Cap, Iron Man, and Ant-Man are trying to infiltrate Stark Tower once they've original Avengers, have captured Loki, and you get that really cool moment where Cap comes up against Cap. And this was one of my favourite parts of the film. You get such a kick-ass fight. He's taking the mick out of the fact that he's always saying, I can do this all day, which I thought was a great throwback line. There's a running joke about America's ass. Arse. It doesn't sound as good when you're British. America's ass. Ultimately, though, Steve manages to get the Mind Stone, but Iron Man and Ant-Man aren't quite able to get the Tesseract. Through a series of hijinks, Loki ends up grabbing it and disappearing into a portal, which I presume will help set up his spin-off TV series that we're going to get eventually. I completely forgot that they go and get Barton. I completely forgot that they go to recruit Hawkeye, because we get that badass tracking shot of Hawkeye just laying out all these Yakuza gang members. Going back to the events that happened in 2012 now, we get that really cool moment of Cap going into the elevator, which is a callback to the moment from Winter Soldier. But just when I thought he was going to say that line,
We get started. Does anyone want to get out?
he completely flips expectations, knowing that these are technically agents of Hydra, whispers in Sitwell's ear, "Hail Hydra," which, if you've read the comics, is also a callback to that moment where Cap turned out to be working for Hydra all along, which was certainly a controversial moment. But seeing as they weren't able to get the Tesseract, Tony and Steve come up with an idea to travel back to 1970 for where they are not only able to get the Tesseract, but also more Pym particles for them to actually get back, considering they only had enough for one round trip. We then cut to Thor and Rocket, who are on Asgard and trying to extract the ether from Natalie Portman, who makes the briefest of cameos and probably got paid millions of dollars for it. But that's not what the Asgard sequence is about. It's more about Thor reconnecting with his mother and sharing one final moment together, because if you've seen the events of Thor the Dark World, Thor's mother Frigga dies in that film and he's not able to share that one connection because, like in Infinity War, his entire family are gone. It's such a touching scene that Chris Hemsworth is amazing, not just for comedic but these emotional moments that he's able to share. It's a very touching scene. They extract the ether, and Thor gets his hammer back as well. So now he's got Stormbreaker and Mjolnir, and they go back. Their job is complete. Then we go over to Morag, where War Machine and Nebula are trying to get the Power Stone. We get a hilarious scene where they're watching Star-Lord do his whole dance routine in the ruins of the temple that opens Guardians of the Galaxy. War Machine just knocks him out cold. They manage to get the Power Stone, and Rhodey goes back in time, but Nebula can't. She malfunctions, and we ultimately get revealed that, like we knew in 2014, they aren't the only ones looking for that stone. Because Nebula is, Gamora is, as is Thanos. So this is where it gets kind of tricky to explain, because these are the 2014 editions. Thanos is a lot more ruthless because he's still believing that this is his plan, this is his destiny. He hasn't become as wise as he was in, say, Infinity War or in Endgame. And so he's a lot more brutal, he's a lot less forgiving than we remember. 2014 Nebula starts malfunctioning too, because their two, I guess, cybernetic existences are conflicting each other, and they are able to locate the present day Nebula on Morag and beam her up. So now you've got this dynamic of what is going to happen. How is Thanos going to now intervene? Black Widow and Hawkeye travel to Vormir, and as soon as I realized that they were going to Vormir, again, if you've seen Infinity War, one of them ain't coming back, because it's a soul for a soul. And this scene is played out so well, because Red Skull comes down. A lot, when I went to a showing, a lot of people seemed surprised that it was the Red Skull, because it's like not like he was in Infinity War at all. But then it becomes a situation of who is going to sacrifice themselves. So the two are pretty much fighting each other to die in this situation, to give up their soul so the rest of humanity can be saved. Which, and in my head, I was like, well, on paper, I reckon they'll probably kill off Hawkeye so he can give his life to save his family. It's probably the safest decision they're going to go for, seeing as we have a Black Widow movie coming within the next year or so. However, they surprised me, and they ended up killing Black Widow. That's her end, and it's a very powerful scene, because her entire arc from when we met her in Iron Man 2 through to the Avengers and now all the way through to Endgame has been about protecting and finding a family. And she found her family, but at the end of Infinity War, she lost them. And so by doing this, she can bring her family back. It just comes at the ultimate sacrifice. And I thought Jeremy Renner does a fantastic job at relaying his complete and utter trauma and loss at losing her, But give it up for Scarlett Johansson. She has been so solid in every single time she's suited up as Black Widow, and just this sense of she's wanting to let go and let her do this one thing. I just think it's a fantastic way to end her character. What this means for the Black Widow movie, I ain't got a clue. But as an end to her character arc, I just thought it was so beautiful. And then we cut back to Steve and Tony, who are now in the 1970s. We get a great Stan Lee cameo, which I think might be his last one. I'm a little upset that there wasn't one that maybe Stan Lee just playing Stan Lee, but it's great to always see him in a cameo, and if that is his last one, I'm gonna miss it in the films. So they go back to an old shield base where Captain America was technically born, where Steve Rogers basically had the injections and became Captain America. So they split up, and Tony ends up bumping into Howard Stark, and the two share a fantastic conversation about parenthood, and even though Tony can't explain that that's his dad, you can just tell that he just wants to let him know that he's so proud of him anyway. Steve goes off to get the pin particles, and we get another scarily accurately designed de-aging of Michael Douglas as Hank Pym. Steve goes and grabs the pin particles and ends up hiding in Peggy Carter's office. Peggy doesn't see him, he's in another part of the office, but he sees her through a window, and at that point, I was on a train of where I thought, Cap is going to die. I think it's the only way that he will sacrifice himself in the most heroic way possible. But obviously, as we find out, he doesn't. But as soon as I saw that moment of him looking and remembering Peggy, I knew that Cap probably wasn't going to die, and there'll be some way where he goes back in time and joins Peggy for that dance that he promised her. Lo and behold, it did happen, but we'll get onto that in a bit. Everyone comes back. They've got all the Infinity Stones they need. Obviously, though, they are missing Black Widow, and it hits our core group of Avengers really hard. However, with the stones, they're able to put it in a Iron Man design gauntlet, and the group are discussing who's it's going to be, who's going to snap their fingers to basically return the world the way it was. Thor suggests doing it, but he's in no fit state to do it. By the end, Hulk is the one to volunteer because the radiation inside the stones and the glove is mostly gamma, so he feels like he can take it. He puts the glove on, the Avengers facility goes on complete lockdown, and he snaps his fingers. His entire arm, though, is like fried to bits. Originally, when I thought it was like peeling the skin away and you just got like his muscles and tendons, but since I've watched it then, I thought that was a little bit too graphic for a Marvel film, but since I've watched it, it's just his t-shirt burning away and just his green skin left. So he snaps his fingers, and it looks like everyone is back. Hawkeye gets a call from his wife. Scott goes out to a garden and see that there's birds flying. However, they are interrupted because when Thanos abducted the present day Nebula, they did a little switcheroo for the 2014 Nebula and sent her back instead. And she was basically sabotaging the whole things to send Thanos and his ship and his entire fleet basically to present day. So his ship blasts through the Avengers facility, and when I say that he completely decimates that area, he blows the entire place to shit. Genuinely, at that point, I thought everyone was dead. When I saw it for the first time, I thought, he's just killed everyone there. There's no way they could survive it. As it turns out, they all did survive it, although they're not in a good state. Ant-Man has shrunk down, so he managed to avoid it. Rhodey's pinned down, Rocket's pinned down, Hulk is having to literally carry the weight of an entire building on his back. And so whilst they're sorting everything out, Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man are surveying the destruction and notice that Thanos is just sitting there on the battlefield waiting. And so this is it. This is the final stand, and is arguably the greatest third act ever. Can we say that yet? I mean, I don't have hardly any faults with the film itself, but I certainly do not have a single fault with how this third act was executed. Thor's all suited and booted. He's got Stormbreaker and Mjolnir in each hand. He's charging up Iron Man with thunder. But Thanos, at this point, he is basically as strong as he will ever be. This was him at the height of his powers, just without the stones. He is laying out all three of these characters. He sends Captain America soaring across the field. He knocks down Iron Man, and he grabs Stormbreaker and seemingly is trying to push it into Thor's chest. And this is when we get one of those holy shit moments. Because we see Mjolnir is way across the battlefield, and we just get this shot of it being picked up by someone, and we don't know who. And I know a lot of people were just assuming that it was Thor trying to summon Mjolnir, and it'll come back and smack Thanos across the head, and it does. It flies and it clocks Thanos across the face, and then it flies back away from Thor into Captain America's hand. All this time, he has been really worthy. We saw that bit in Avengers Age of Ultron where he goes to pick up the hammer and it wobbles ever so slightly, and the look on Thor's face is just one of terror. And Thor now gets that great line of like, I knew it. And Captain America is just obliterating Thanos with the shield and the hammer. He's charging it up with the lightning. It is such a badass moment. However, there is one moment that somehow is even more badass than that. It's even more epic than Thor's entrance in Wakanda in Infinity War. It's not just my favorite moment of the MCU, it's probably my favorite moment in any superhero film I've ever seen. So Iron Man is down for the count. Thor's down for the count. Pretty much all of the other Avengers are down. All that's left is Cap, and his shield is completely split in two. Thanos' entire army is behind him. We get another one of those amazing shots where you've got Thanos, his War Dogs army, his Black Order, his ships, all the Chitauri are there, and it is just Captain America standing up on a rock facing all of that. And this is the moment. This is the moment that whenever I see this film, the entire audience lose their minds. Because, and I can safely say this, from this moment onwards, you hear a lot of people talking about how they cried during Avengers Endgame. And most of that is for the sad scenes that we'll touch on in a bit. But for me, I I lost complete control when you hear through the radio Sam, the Falcon, say, on your left. And one of Doctor Strange's portals open up, and it's just silence as Black Panther, Okoye, and Shuri march through. And then another portal opens up, and we see Doctor Strange, Drax, Mantis, Star-Lord, and Spider-Man swing through from their time on Titan. And then it just gets better from there, because every single character that has had somewhat of a heroic impact in any of the Marvel films up until this date makes their appearance through these portals. They join Captain America side by side. You've got Wasp, you've got Valkyrie, Korg, even Howard the Duck makes the tiniest little appearance. Scarlet Witch shows up. All tribes of Wakanda are there. Ant-Man goes into Giant Man. Hulk, Rocket, War Machine, they're all ready to take on Thanos. And it cuts to a brilliant moment. Josh Brolin does a fantastic job of just Thanos suddenly realizing that his chances aren't looking very good. And arguably, such an amazing moment in this film is where they are just panning down that line of all the Marvel characters. The Avengers theme is building up, and it leaves it on Captain America, and he puts his hand out, catches Thor's hammer, and he just says the words that, as a Marvel fan, as a superhero fan, they haven't said it in all of these 22 films. He grabs that hammer and he says, Avengers, assemble. And everyone charges into battle. The Avengers theme is on full volume, and the first time, and I still tear up when I watch it for the third or fourth time. I lost all control, because in my eyes, this was a moment that, for someone that read comic books and these giant these giant team ups, I only thought could happen on the pages of a comic book, and I'm there witnessing it in a feature length cinematic movie, is honestly the stuff of dreams. Is everything I've wanted. And yes, is it fan service? Like, of course it is. But it's some of the best fan service we're ever gonna get. And the battle that ensues after that is just epic on every conceivable level. Team ups that we didn't even think were going to be possible. Peter Parker coming in and grabbing that gauntlet as Captain Marvel shows up and blasts through Thanos' main warship, and she goes to meet Peter and take the gauntlet off of him, and she's then surrounded by all of the other female characters and the heroes of the MCU. And I know a few people have said that it's a bit tokenistic to have that moment, but I've been in the cinema and there have been females that have watched that particular moment and have just, like me when I saw all of the Avengers line up, have just lost complete control, because that's something that they never thought would happen. Marvel has unfortunately predominantly been a boys' club. It should never have been a boys' club. It should have always been about equality and inclusivity, and that moment is just iconic for any little girl that has read a comic or any little girl that has seen a Marvel film and wants a moment of all of the superheroes that she can relate to. However, the culmination of the battle is a little bit bittersweet, because they're trying to send the gauntlet back in time to return all the stones so Thanos never has a chance, but he then destroys the van that has the little time machine in it, and he's completely destroying our Avengers. Thor, Captain America, even Captain Marvel. And Doctor Strange gives Tony this look after Tony originally saying, hey, after all of these 14 million scenarios that you sat and watched, tell me this is the one. And Doctor Strange goes, well, if I tell you that, it won't happen. And he looks at Thanos and he realizes that this is that one moment. And he gives Tony the little symbol, and that, unfortunately, it means the end for Tony Stark, and Thanos goes to put the gauntlet on, and Tony wrestles him for a bit, and gets thrown off, and Thanos goes to snap his fingers and say, I am inevitable, but snaps his fingers and nothing happens. And he looks and all the stones have been taken off his gauntlet. It turns, and we see Iron Man has now got them on his sort of makeshift gauntlet, and he says the words that ended the very first Iron Man. Now that the whole thing has come full circle, and he goes and he says,
I am Iron Man.
he snaps his fingers, and Thanos, all of his allies, all of his warships, they just turn to ash. How Infinity War ended, but now all the bad guys have gone. But Tony, being a human, means that he can't handle the power of the Infinity Stones, and ultimately means that he dies because of it. He's gravely wounded. War Machine comes down and comforts him. Spider-Man swings in and is distraught at seeing his mentor now dying, and Pepper comes in. She's in the rescue suit, and she goes to Tony and is like, it's okay. It's okay. You can rest now. And he dies. And all of the Avengers have lost kind of like their leader, their originator. So Stark has his funeral, and they show that his arc reactor that says even Tony Stark has a heart or something along those lines is sent out into the river. And when I say that we see pretty much every Marvel character that is still alive and has some relevance of being at his funeral, everyone's there in their own little groups. You've got the main core Avengers, you've got Black Panther and some members from Wakanda, you've got the Guardians of the Galaxy, you've got Hawkeye and his family, you've even got Ty Simpkins, who played the little kid in Iron Man 3, he's shown up. Maria Hill's back. Thunderbolt Ross is there. Captain Marvel, Samuel L. Jackson also is there. Kind of cheekily sneaks around the corner, kind of like how he did at the very end of the first Iron Man. And it is such a beautiful send off. We see Happy Hogan talking to his daughter about how his dad used to like cheeseburgers. Again, such a fantastic callback to the very first Iron Man. And it's so sad to see him go, but what a way to just close out his chapter. And then they need to focus on getting the stones back, and so they give Cap the task of going back in time with all the pin particles and placing the stones back, which makes complete sense, although it would be a little weird because he's got to return the soul stone, which means that he's got to come face to face with Red Skull again, which would be interesting. But as soon as he steps on that podium and he's saying goodbye to Sam and he's saying goodbye to Bucky as well, at that point I knew Cap's not gonna come back when they return him, and he doesn't. They start frantically panicking when Cap doesn't come back, and they turn and they see that uh, he's now lived out his life. He's an old guy sitting on a bench who looks seriously like Clint Eastwood. I know it's Chris Evans under a bunch of makeup, but it looks so much like Clint Eastwood. And he talks to Sam, and he gives Sam the shield. So that means that now he's going to take on the mantle of Captain America. And yeah, no, it turns out that he went back in time and he's lived out his life with Peggy. He came back for the dance, which, like Iron Man, is just such a perfect resolution for his character. I also completely forgot. Thor decides that he's going to leave Asgard. Valkyrie's now in charge and joins the Guardians of the Galaxy. So now we're going to get the Asgardians of the Galaxy. I'm so pumped for that. And that's it. That's the end of Avengers Endgame. There's no post-credit scenes because there doesn't need to be. This is the ending of a story. It doesn't need to set up anything else because the other films will do that for it. This is a conclusion, and we never really get that in superhero films because everyone tries and they're setting up so much that it's very rare that we get just a contained film on its own, but we never get an ending. An Endgame, as the title alludes to, is an ending. I absolutely adore this film, if you couldn't tell already. I think there are some moments that are beyond iconic and that will live on in cinema for ages, for generations. I can't wait to see it again and again. I just love the sensation of seeing it in a sold out crowd, especially if that crowd hasn't probably seen it before because the reactions are the best. But I want to know what your favorite moment, what your favorite singular moment in Avengers Endgame is. Let me know just your general thoughts about the film as well, about anything that happens. If we can start a discussion, I think that'd be great as well. I know this video has gone on for a bit, but like I said, there is just so much to talk about in this film. If you have enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and blog are in the description below. Many thanks for watching, guys, and I shall see you in the next video.